Right, guys, are you happy with this split screen? Or actually, I'll make it larger so you can make it larger. Is that large enough? You can all see that. That, yeah, can you see it? Oh. Lol. That's better. Okay, so the first part of our system is the main. I've called my main. And then inside there, we've got our main method, which is the main entry point to our system. So here, we've got a call to the class menu. Okay, so there's nothing really that special about it. But on here, you could write calls the class menu and runs menu method. Okay, so we'll go into the menu next, sorry. Okay, so at the top, we've got two imports. One is the scanner. So I've set a scanner up in a class called objects so that we don't have to keep remaking the scanner in every class that we need it. I've created it once and we can access that from anywhere within the project as long as we've got the import. This is our main menu class, and this is our menu constructor. So remember I said a constructor is just like a posh method. Basically, it runs that method as soon as we call the class. Okay, so let's put some notes on. So allows use of scanner import for array list. Okay. So if there's anything that I go through that you think I skim over, just shout out, all right, and I'll go through it in a bit more detail. So here we've got private string s input, which is just getting the input declared and ready to be used. Then, like I say, this is the constructor called menu, and in here we've got I input. The reason I put the I and the S before them is so that if we're looking at a really large program, we know that S input is probably going to be a string, and we know that I input is going to be an integer. So it just makes it easier for other people reading my code to see how it's put together. Here we've got a call to the player class. So we're creating a player which allows us to use the methods easily with inside player. All right. And then here we've got the same but with team. So creating a player object. So when we create a copy of a class, and the same with a scanner as well, we're creating objects of the class. So if you imagine the class is a blueprint, as soon as we say scanner sc equals new scanner, sc is our object. And in this example, player is our object, and then here team is our object as well. Okay, so creating team object. Here we've got our do while loop. So this bit of code's a bit long. I'll see if I can scroll down and fit it all on screen. No, it's too long. But basically what we've got here is a do while. Can you remember the difference between a while and a do while? Remember the Roadrunner I showed you? Do you remember the picture?
What was this?
Months probably. So a do while will display this code here before it runs the check on the conditions. So this is the start of our code. It will run all of this, and then when it gets down here, it evaluates the conditions to see if they're true or not. Whereas a while, which we've got here, evaluates the true or false here, doesn't it? So a while happens instantly. So a while will do the evaluation, then run the code. Whereas a do while will run the code first and then evaluate the conditions. Yeah? Make sense? Do you get it? A little bit? Cool. So do while prints out this menu first, runs through all of this code, and then evaluates the conditions at the bottom. So this while loop here is a bit of input error detection. So what it says is while has while not objects.sc has next, which is a bit confusing, but basically what that means is that while the input is not equal to an integer, run this bit of code here. So all the while we're trying to enter a double, so like a number with a decimal, a character or a string, this while loop will pick that up and say, wait a minute, this isn't an integer. I need to run this code here until it is an actual integer. So a number between 1 and whatever we're looking at, okay? Once we know that the input is an integer, we can assign it to input. Remember what happens when we try and assign strings to integers? It crashes our system, doesn't it? You guys remember that? Cool. So here we've got the note on here anyway. So it says input validation, prints message if input is not a whole number. That's pretty straightforward. So this will assign the user input to input. So it assigns user input to variable input. Okay. This is just a big if statement. You might get something on the left here saying that you can replace it with a switch statement, which I'll show you. It's basically the same thing, just different wording. Okay, so all this is saying is, if the input is equal to 1, run this method. So if we have a look here, add player, and it will run the player.add method. Okay, and then it will break that. If the input's equal to 2, which will be menu option 2, it will view the player, and then so on. So we've got that all the way through our menu options, okay? And then all the way down to number 8. If the input is equal to 0, it will break out of that loop and it will terminate the program. It will just end, all right? So that's like our exit condition. So here you can see 0 is equal to exit. Yeah. Okay, so that's that bit done. I'll minimize that. There we go. And then the next part that we've got is the event type. So this is another menu for us to set up our event type. Bless you. So we've got our do while loop again. So we're getting our prompts printed out to the screen so the user can see what they need to do next. So the first question is 1 event or 5. 1 for 1 event, 2 for 5 events. We've got another bit of input validation. So we've got another while loop that will let us know, or let the user know, that they can only enter the numbers 1 or 2. Once the appropriate number is entered, it will assign it to input, okay, and then it will move on to the next bit. So I can show you this do while loop in a bit more detail. So here is the start of our do while loop on line 64, and this is the end of it on line 76. So do all of this while the input is greater than 0 and less than 2. So that means that we keep him within the bounds of the options that we've got. So that should be 3 actually. So 1 and 2 there. Yep. And then we've got another, what was this for? Oh. So we've got another if statement here. And this is going to update our values in our event class. So if the input is equal to 1, which is 1 event, we're going to set the events to 1. So this is the event class, and inside the event class it's the set event method. So if I press Control and left click on that, it will take us to the event class, and then you can see here it's the single or 5 event method. So this method is void. It doesn't return anything. Do you remember when we looked at returning strings and stuff like that? We don't need to return anything, but it does take an integer as a parameter or an argument. So if you noticed, we've got event.setEvent and then the number 1. That's us passing the integer to that method, okay? And then all that does is update this this integer, no, sorry, not integer, what's it called? Variable. So it'll update this variable, which is currently set to 0, to either 1 or 5. Okay, and then that's our 1 or 5 events sorted. Okay. If the event is equal to 2, event.setEvent, like I say, is set to 5. Let's close that one, so that one's done. Actually, let me just quickly pop a note on here. So sets methods in event class, class event method set event to 1, and I'll add the comment in here as well for when it's the 5. Okay, so that's our 1 event or 5 events sorted. Everyone with me so far? Yeah? Cool. So when we've run that method, we need to run the rest of the methods. So we need to run individual or team event, and we also run the sporting or academic, because these are all what we need to set up our events, aren't they? So if we click on individual or team, which is right here, we run through a very, very similar set of options. So another do while loop with a user prompt asking if it's an individual or team. We've got the while loop that says it must be an integer input, and if it's not, this this command is printed out. And then here we've got our if. So I'll show you just this quickly. So the individual or team is set to individual by default. Okay, so we only need to change that if the input is equal to 1. Actually, that should be 2. Oh, sorry, if the input does not equal 1. So if it doesn't equal 1, it must be team, in which case we can update that variable with team. Yeah. And then after that method here, we've got sporting or academic. And again, it's very, very similar. So we've got our do while loop, we've got our prompts, and then here, if the input does not equal 1, event will be set to academic, and it's currently set to sporting. So we're kind of coding half of what we need to, because we're setting the default event to one of the 2 options. Okay. So this method brings everything together. So it's our user input checks. You can use this in your testing table to say that we've got a method that checks to make sure the event is set up correctly. So we've got just a line there to just separate it off. Is this information correct? Then we print out this method here. It says event amount, which will be set to 1 or 5. We've got team type, which will be set to individual or team. And then we've got event type, which will be set to sporting or academic. Okay. If it's a no, if they're not happy with that, it will just pull up the menu again, and then they can go through add player or add team and go through the process again. All right. Okay. I'll go through the player bit. So this is the player class, which, do you guys remember the interface segregation, or what an interface is? Yeah? Okay, so for those that don't, an interface is basically like a blueprint. So we've got this interface here called actions. So instead of public class, it's public interface. And anything that wants to use or implements actions must use these methods. Okay? So player, you can see, implements actions. So it wants to make use of that template of methods. So here, all of our methods that have got at override above them, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they are the methods from the interface. Okay, we've got a few other methods in there as well, which basically just retrieve and set information. So we've got a string here that is called getFirstName. So it will take the user's name and it will store it, or retrieve it, sorry, from here, from the first name. Okay, so we've got methods that will set the name, and we've got methods that will retrieve the name, and we've got the same for last name and team name as well. Team name is slightly different because it sets the team name automatically only in the player class, and the team name is first name and last name just combined. Nice and easy. Okay. So this is one of the overridden methods, so one of the implemented methods. It's got a prompt here, enter first name, and then that name is stored in the variable first name. We've got set last name, which takes the user input and then sets it to last name. And then, like I say, we've got the set team, which basically automatically assigns the variable first and last name with no spaces. So we could have added some extra validation in here. So we could say you entered, then we'd do plus first name, and we could say, is that correct, yes or no? So we could add loads of validation in if we wanted to, but we haven't. You could write about that in your report as something that you would change in the future, or something that you'd add in the future to show that there are still issues with the code, but things that you're aware of that could be fixed or implemented later. Okay. We've got our array list here. So our array list is the storage that we use in. And all that's doing is creating a string called deets or details. And to that, it's adding first name separated by a comma, last name separated by a comma, and then the team name. So we're going to end up with Duncan, comma, Skilton, comma, Duncan Skilton, or whatever it is you input. Okay. And here we've got our add method. So the int index is currently set to 0. So what that means is that it will add in the very first space of the array. And then we've got a while loop. So this is how we implement our restriction to 20 players. So while it's less than 21, because anything less than 21 is going to be 20, isn't it? We're able to add a first name, we're able to add a last name, we can set our team name, we can add the data to our array list to index position, which is currently set to 0. And as soon as it's done that, we need to update the index position because we don't want to overwrite the data again. So we do index plus plus. So on the next line go through, this will actually be equal to 1. And then we'll make sure that we're not overriding the data that we've previously saved. Okay, you with me so far? So here we could add in some more validation. So what happens if we're at 20? There's no output here to say what you can do. So you could put a system out here saying you're currently at your limit of 20 players, press something to delete some, or whatever it is you want to do. Okay, so we can add that in to make it a bit more user-friendly. So these here are all method calls. Yeah, so because they've got the parentheses after them, that means they're calling a method. You can hold down your control button and left click on them and it will take you to that method. So if you wanted to see that particular method in a bit more detail, you can. This one is also a method. So it's add to array list. So this is the actual method that adds the data to our storage, to our array list. And we pass it a parameter, which is the index position. So at the moment, the index is set to 0. So when we run this the first time, it will pass all the information to position 0 in the array. Is that making sense when I'm saying the positions? Let me see if I can draw it. Oh, I can do it on the board. So you've seen the memes where programmers say indexes start at 0, or you start counting from 0. Have you guys seen those? I don't really have a very different sense. Okay, so array starts at 0 rather than 1. So the first position in an array would be 0. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Let's try it here. So we've got our square brackets for the array, kind of like that. So this is position 0. So it would be, okay, so the first bit would be Duncan, comma, Skilton, comma, Duncan, Skilton. Then our counter is updated here. So from 0, it will be updated to 1, like that. And then we'll be adding Bradley, comma, etc. Yeah? Okay. So like I say, we're passing that index position to the method, so we know exactly where we can add data. There's no error for user input there. Okay, and then all we're doing is adding the data in, to array list. Let me click on that. Where's array list? Here it is. So add in the details there, and that's it. So that gets added to each position in the index. Okay. The last method that we've got here for player is to view everything in the array list. So here we've got a bit of an error check, I suppose. If the list is empty, so you can see there it says is empty, it will print up that you need to add players first. So there's nothing to print. Okay. And then this is the loop that goes through. So while the iterator has next, so while there is more information to come, print out that information. So it will just list 0, name and information, 1, name and information, all the way down to 20. Okay. And then we've got player.remove. So this doesn't remove individual elements, it will just clear the entire array or clear the entire storage and reset the counter to 0, and then we can go through the process again. Okay? Yeah? Okay. So the team one is pretty much the same. So it implements actions, but you can see here it extends player. So rather than having to write the variables again and things like that, we can just use the ones from the player class. Okay, so here we're using the set last name, here we're using the set first name, and then here we've got set team, but this time it allows the user to enter a name for the team. That's the only difference. Okay, then here we've got our add method, we've got our view methods, and we've got our clear method. So those two classes are pretty much the same. Okay, so we've done actions, we've done a bit of event, haven't we? Oh no, we did all of event. What else have we got to do? Score. So here we've got awarded points. So initially the score is set to -1. And what we're doing, sorry, I should have said, what we're doing here when we call award points, we're calling the array list. So that will be the player that we're looking at. So that will automatically know what number it needs to be because it will be cycling through them. And we need to know whether it's 1 or 5 events. If it's 1 event, it will only run through this once. If it's 5 events, it will run through until it gets to 5. Okay. So if there's no events, it will ask you to create an event first. I had to put that in there because if it wasn't in there, it would crash and cause an array out of bounds. So you can write about that in your report to say that we needed to add that in there, otherwise we'll get an array out of bounds. If it's single event is equal to 1 or single events or 5 events is equal to 5, I've got a test in there. So this is print line debugging. So what I'm doing is testing to make sure that the list has been populated correctly, that I've set it up right, basically, and it will print out the list size. So I can comment that out now. Okay. If the list size is greater than 0, because we can't cycle through it if it's less than 0, we will run this for loop here. Okay. So while I is less than the size of the list, so while we've got more players to come sort of thing, print out I, so this again is print line debugging, so I can comment that out, just so I know that the data I'm entering is being read correctly by the by Java when we run the program. Okay, and then here we've got a prompt. What did whoever get? What was their score? Okay. And then you can enter the scores. So the score must be greater than 0 but less than 21, so between 1 and 20. And then we've got this error here, error checker here to make sure that it's a whole number. Okay. This little method is quite cool. I'm not going to lie, it's quite a cool method. So it combines 2 types of list. So we've got our original list, which is our first data store, which is storing 3 things, isn't it? The first name, the last name, and the team name. So for each position that we're at, 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way through to 20, it will add the score for the team player or the team to that list as well. So we've got a list inside a list. Okay, and then it will print it out so that you can see what you've done. All right. So we can comment that one out as well and say that's an example of print line debugging. So let's just scroll up a bit. If our list is not greater than 0, here's the else for that. So you need to add players to the team, players or team first, and then it will go back to the main menu. All right. If you want to display the teams and points, you call this method, you pass the list, so it's either player list or team list, and then it will print out the name, last name, team name, and it will print out the score as well. So you've got all of that information that will be printed out. All right. I think that's about it, isn't it? Oh, objects. So the objects is just where I put the scanner. So if we were going to be using more inputs or outputs, if we were going to be using decimal points or something like that, I could set that all up here. We've got a class called short store. So this is where all of our arrays are. So we've got 4 of them. Top one's set to 20 because it's the player array and we can have 20 players. This one, the team one, is set to 5 because we can have 5 teams of 4. Or is it 4 teams of 5? That's fine. So that's set to 5. And then this is this is the more complicated array. It's called a hash map. So it's taken a string, which is actually our list, and also an integer, which is our scores. Okay, so that's taken 2 points there. And did I do anything for tournament? No. Okay, we can delete that class then, actually. There we go. That's it. That's all the program does. Are you guys happy with that? Is there anything that I went through that you're not sure of? That's it, yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's that simple. What bits are you not sure of? Don't say all of it. You can only choose one bit specifically.
Well, I understood like all of it, half, but then there was also like all of it, not as well.
Okay.
So I understood all of it a little bit, but then all of it not.
That's good, because at the beginning of the year you probably wouldn't have.
No, I wouldn't have a clue.
Exactly. Right, okay, I'll stop this recording and I'll get that ready and uploaded for you guys.